All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our public meeting tonight. I'm on the Muskegon County Landfill proposed remedial action plan, for addressing PFAS, groundwater contamination. We got about 32 people logged in right now, and we're expecting probably to have a few more join us pretty soon here, I'm sure. My name is Jim Ostrowski, and I work in the Environmental Support Division here at EGLE. I'm going to be helping with hosting this session tonight. A couple of logistical details before I turn over to our moderator. First of all, you probably noticed all your lines are muted at this time. I will explain how we can unmute your lines later on when we get the Q&A. If you have a question tonight, you can type it into the Q&A box on your Zoom toolbar, and we'll be taking questions after the presentations. Also, you can click the raise hand icon on your toolbar, and what that does is let us know you want to ask a question. And when we get to the Q&A part, we'll remind you about that. And what that does is it'll allow us to unmute your mic. Also, if you are on the phone, and looks like we have a couple people that might be joining using phone only with the audio. If you have a question and want to raise your hand, you can do so by clicking the #2 button on your phone. Click #2 and that raises your hand and we'll be able to call on you. Also want to remind you that we are recording this meeting, and like with all our public meetings, we will post it in the next few days up onto our EGLE YouTube channel. I will remind you about all that at the end as well. So that's all my logistical stuff. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Fred Sellers with EGLE, and he's going to get us kicked off. Go ahead, Fred.
All right. Thanks, Jim. So tonight, Jim's already explained what we're doing here. By way of introductions, my name is Fred Sellers. I'm the District Supervisor for the Materials Management Division of EGLE in the Grand Rapids District Office. And with me presenting tonight is Kent Walters, geologist from the Grand Rapids District Materials Management Division, and Tim Unseld, environmental engineer with the Grand Rapids District of Materials Management, is also here. I don't know if he's planned to present anything tonight, but he's here if there's questions that he can answer. So our agenda tonight, we're just gonna have a brief site overview with Kent, explain a little bit about the landfill and what's going on there. And then we'll get an overview of the proposed remedial action plan that Muskegon County Landfill is proposing. Greg Leverance, landfill manager for Muskegon County Landfill, will speak briefly, I believe. And then Kurt Van Apeldoorn, their consultant, will give a presentation. At the end of the presentation by Mr. Van Apeldoorn, we will have a question and answer session, and you can enter questions in the chat as Jim mentioned before, and the other options, raise your hand, etc. So we'll go over that again at the end, and then I'll also take you out to the MPART website and take a look at that, how to get out there, a couple easy clicks and get that taken care of. So with that, I will turn it over to Kent Walters.
Thanks, Fred. Hello, everyone. Like Fred mentioned, let's see, I'm trying to change. There we go. Just clicking the wrong button. Like Fred mentioned, my name is Kent Walters. I am a geologist in the Grand Rapids District with EGLE, and I help manage landfills in the western part of Michigan. And I'm just going to give a pretty high overview of some details. And before we get into those details, we need to know where the site is located. So if we start on the left in the Lower Peninsula, Michigan, we can see the site is located in western Michigan. And we zoom in a little bit closer and we see that star in the middle figure. We can see that the site is located just to the east of Muskegon. And on the far right, we can see the landfill highlighted in the yellow rectangle, and it sits right next to the Muskegon Wastewater Treatment Plant. So why sample for PFAS? How did we get to where we are? So in 2017, EGLE identified landfills that previously or currently were known to have impact their groundwater. There's a lot of landfills across the state of Michigan that have historical groundwater contamination. And what EGLE was concerned about was if they have historical contamination, was it possible that they also had PFAS contamination in that historic plume? And what we did was we categorized those as high priority landfills, so which basically meant we wanted to get to those landfills first. So when we take a look at Muskegon Landfill in the center figure here, you can see just a simple diagram of the landfill layout, the different landfill cells. On the western side of the landfill, you see that red rectangle that says unlined area. And that basically means it's an area of the landfill where trash is basically just placed onto the ground. There's no liner, there's no plastic underneath it, there's no clay underneath it. It's just trash, and any potential contaminants that are in that trash, there's potential for it to leak out and into the groundwater. This site also has historic contamination. It's been documented early in its history. So this really met the qualifications of being a high priority site. So EGLE really wanted to get to the site. This is one of many sites that we wanted to get to and take a look at the groundwater to see if there's PFAS. So in 2018, EGLE requested the landfill to develop a sampling plan for PFAS. The landfill agreed, and they submitted a work plan to sample for PFAS, and they completed the sampling. So what did we find? What are the results? Well, in November of 2018, the landfill tested 11 groundwater monitoring wells, and 2 of those monitoring wells came back above drinking water standards. So once you determine that there's PFAS in the groundwater, the next steps would be to determine how wide it is, how long it is, how deep it is, because you really want to know where it is so that you can make sure that it's not impacting drinking water or surface water or other environmental issues. So that's what the landfill did. And from 2018 to 2021, the landfill continued to test for PFAS. They did that by sampling existing monitoring wells that they already had in place. And they also installed monitoring wells. Like I said earlier, what this did is it allowed them to figure out where PFAS was in the groundwater. In February of 2021, the landfill completed the PFAS investigation. What I mean by that is they sampled enough and they installed enough monitoring wells that gave them sort of a defined view of how long, how deep, and how wide that PFAS contamination is. In May of 2021, the landfill submitted a proposed remedial action plan, or a RAP, to address PFAS impacts to groundwater. And I'll get into the details of RAP in the next slide. But first, what is a RAP? What requires a RAP to be completed in the first place? Well, in Part 115, or the Solid Waste Law, it requires landfills that have a release, or landfills, in other words, landfills that have impacted groundwater, to determine where they impacted groundwater. And like I said in my previous slide, the landfill did that. They went out, they tested groundwater, they put in more wells, and they defined where that PFAS and where those PFAS impacts was. The other part of a RAP is to develop a plan. What's your long-term management plan for the site going to be now that there's contamination there? How are you going to manage it? So that's what the landfill did. They submitted a proposed remedial action plan, or RAP, to EGLE, and there's already been several rounds of review, meaning that the site submitted us a RAP back in May. We reviewed it, we provided some comments, and we had several back and forths. And we got to the point where which now would be to a point where we can present it to the public. One other thing that I wanted to mention is that within the RAP, they propose basically their long-term strategy for management of the contamination. And what I want to make make sure people know is that the option that they selected is just one of several options. What sites typically do is they look at the site, they look at the contamination, the site-specific characteristics of a site, and then they determine what's the best strategy to move forward. How can we best manage the contamination at the site? So like I said, that's what they did. And they chose a selection that they thought was best for the site. And that's what's in the remedial action plan. And like I said earlier, after review, what EGLE has found is that it does meet Part 115 solid waste requirements. The current plan does. And I will mention too that if you guys weren't aware, their remedial action plan, the proposed remedial action plan is available on their MPART website, which Fred will later show you guys how to get there to the website at least. And with that, I won't get into too much of the details of the wrap. I'll leave that to the landfill. I will pass it off to Greg Leverance, who's going to introduce himself. Greg Leverance is the landfill manager for Muskegon County Landfill, and he and their consultants will get into the details, the specific details of the remedial action plan. So Jim, if you could please unmute Greg and Kurt.
Yep, both Greg and Kurt should be both unmuted. So Greg, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Am I on?
Okay. Yes, you're on. So you can go ahead, and Kent, you're going to run the slides, right?
Yep, I will run slides.
Okay, thank you.
All right, great. Appreciate it. Thanks, Kent. My name is Greg Leverance, and I serve as the Muskegon County Solid Waste Supervisor. I'd like to thank EGLE for hosting this meeting and the review and comment of the proposed remedial action plan. In response to the PFAS discovered in the landfill monitoring wells, Muskegon County retained Golder and Associates to investigate PFAS on site and develop the proposed remedial action plan. Dean Vandermeulen and Kurt Van Apeldoorn are senior hydrogeologists with Golder, and each have approximately 30 years of experience with the site's hydrogeology. And with that, Kurt, if you're ready, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, my name's Kurt Van Apeldoorn. I work with Golder. My colleague Dean Vandermeulen, he's also available to answer questions. We'll go through the slide that will introduce you to the wrap that we put together. First slide, site location. Kent showed you where it was, perspective of where it is in Michigan. Here we're looking at, you can see the wastewater storage lagoons, the prominent feature on this slide, and just below to the south, lower right corner there is where the landfill is located. The blue that you see there, that is actually a groundwater interceptor trench that goes around the landfill. And there's also one that goes all the way around the storage lagoons too. But just to give you an idea how large this is, that blue box is approximately a half mile long. The Pfas plume is shown in the orange. That's what we determined from our sampling. So next slide. So this slide shows the groundwater contour maps, the groundwater contour map showing the flow directions of groundwater beneath the site. There's 3 arrows there. We'll start upper right. You'll see that that arrow is coming in, pointing towards the south. So groundwater in that area is moving southwest. If you go below Apple Avenue, which is that dark gray line that runs across the screen, you'll see another arrow that is pointing to the north. And we have groundwater flowing to the north towards our site. The Act 87 landfill, you can see where that's located, and Kent showed you on the west side is where it was unlined. So you can see groundwater is coming in from the north and from the south towards the landfill. I mentioned the groundwater interceptor trench feature, which is around the landfill, and Kent's pointing that out. Groundwater is basically going towards that feature on the south side of the landfill, and also coming in the north. That feature controls a lot of the groundwater in the vicinity of the landfill. As you go to the west of the trench, you'll see an arrow that's pointing straight to the north. And that groundwater in that area flows into the groundwater interceptor trench that is all around the wastewater storage lagoon. So that's how groundwater flows around the site. You can see the contours are the black curvy lines. It's kind of like a topo map of groundwater. Other features I just want to point out, the circles are wells, and so we got circles with black and white checks in them. Those are the landfill monitoring wells that we use to collect samples of groundwater. There are some other circles, especially you might see them where that arrow is pointing to the north on the west side. Those are some other monitoring well locations that the wastewater uses. All right, next slide, please. So the scope of our remedial action is continued long-term monitoring and maintenance of monitoring network. That's kind of the main feature of our remedial action plan is monitoring. There's a contingency plan if monitoring wells exceed groundwater protection standards. There's also established on-site land use restrictions for areas with impacted groundwater. Next slide. And this slide is showing you some of the cleanup requirements for PFAS analytes. We got, you'll notice PFOA and PFOS. Those are our most common PFAS analytes that we exceed at the site. There is also a few wells that also have PFNA above the criteria here. So MCL stands for maximum contaminant level. So those are the levels that we want to see numbers below those levels. Next slide. And this is showing you what we found to be the extent of the PFAS plume at the site. So what we're looking at, we basically took that groundwater contour map that you saw earlier and superimposed another, I guess, set of contours, you would say, of that we made in green that shows where the PFAS is in the shallow portion of the aquifer. So basically, wells from the surface on down to 50 feet. Anything in green, that is where PFAS has been detected. And you'll notice on the east side and on the west side, there's a 0 line. So anything east of the east side there is clean, where you don't have any green. And on the west side, where there's a 0 line, anything west of that, where there's no green, that is clean. No PFAS was found in those areas. But in between, you have various shades of green. And basically, the darker the green, the more PFAS we have in the area. And you'll notice we have PFAS coming in from the north, and it's coming in from the south, following groundwater directions, just like we showed the arrows, with the highest concentration on the west side of the Act 87 landfill, pretty much where we would expect it from the landfill. But there are some other sources that are commingling with the plume from the landfill itself, and it all kind of concentrates in that dark green area. But you notice that because groundwater flow on the west side of the trench, groundwater interceptor trench, flows to the north, the PFAS plume does not extend too far to the west. Next slide. Here we have the PFAS plume in what we consider the intermediate portion of the aquifer, basically 50 to 100 feet deep. Again, we see the kind of the same pattern as the shallow. It has most of the PFAS is concentrated to the west of the Act 87, but yet we still do see that it is coming from the north and from the south as well. And east, we have a zero line, and west, we have a zero line, where beyond those zero lines, there is no PFAS. So it's pretty much concentrated in between those zero lines there over the Act 87 landfill and a little bit to the west. Next slide. Here we have the deep portion of the aquifer, which is basically any wells over 100 feet deep. We don't see a lot of color on this map because there isn't a lot of areas where you have an aquifer that deep at the site. It's only, there's basically a sand trough that is on the to the west of the Act 87 landfill, and that's where you see our coloring of the orange there, where we discovered PFAS in the wells. It does not extend any further to the west because it's clay at that depth to the west, and also to underneath the landfill, it is clay underneath there. So at this depth. The next slide will show a cross section. So from east to west, you can see where it's labeled Act 87. So what we're looking at is a view of what it looks like underground. You see the Act 87 on the east, and you extend straight across an area that the landfill would expand into to the west. And that is what we're looking at. You can see some vertical lines extending labels of SB or MW. Those are our soil borings and monitoring wells. And so that's how we determine what kind of soils we have underground and could produce this cross section. The speckled yellow is sand. The hatched orange is clay, and there's other hatchings of that would be the gray hatching is basically a hodgepodge of layers of clay, silt, and sand, whereas the pink, you see pink every so often, that's silt. But you notice the main feature is that trough, and you can see it's basically sand and a clay valley there. And that's where the only areas that we saw the deep wells. Otherwise, the clay is pretty consistent across the site, and keeps water from going down further. Also on here, you can see we have some of the well labels with PFAS components. If they were detected, they are listed. If those components are below the MCL, the criteria that we need to meet, it would be green. It's shown in green. Those that are orangish brown, those are above the MCL limits. And if you see ND underneath it, that means not detected. It was not detect. So you can kind of see that the wells that are just west of the Act 87 plume, that's where a lot of these are that I have on this cross section are from. The two deepest screened wells in the trough, that is another area where we have found some PFAS. And that's what was depicted in orange on that other previous map that showed the plume, the deep aquifer part. Next slide. So groundwater monitoring, that's our main component of the RAP. We have groundwater monitoring wells, sampling requirements, and reporting requirements. Next slide. So here's our typical groundwater monitoring well, just to let you know what we're talking about. It's basically a pipe, usually a 2-inch diameter. Now the ones that we put in nowadays are PVC. So that white pipe extends down into the ground, and we usually put a 5-foot slotted pipe at the bottom. So that's our screen where groundwater can flow in. We set that into various depths of the water in the groundwater, and depending on where we want to take a sample. Around the screen, there's a gravel pack to keep soils from entering the screen. Above that gravel pack is a seal that helps prevent surface water from going down the side of the outside of the casing, on the well casing. And around the top of the well is a protective steel cover. That way we can lock the well and keep it protected. And there's usually a cap on the well itself too, to keep things from falling in the well. Next slide. So this is actually me taking a sample at the site for PFAS. And what you'll see here, you can see there's 3 wells with the pro casing covers with locks on. Of course, the one that's next to me is unlocked. It's kind of hidden there with my leg and almost blends in with my boot. PFAS sampling is something that you have to take some precautions because PFAS is so prevalent out in our community. There's certain things that we got to be careful of when you go sampling because it's in cosmetics and lotions and things like that. It's in clothing that has been treated for being water repellent. So you got to make sure you don't wear water repellent clothing or water repellent boots. Wear nitrile gloves. You also have to be careful where you eat because it's PFAS can be found in food wrappers and things like that from fast food restaurants. So you have to really be cautious of what you do that day so that you don't encounter PFAS and then bring it on site. What I'm holding is a baler. That's what I use to collect the sample. It's basically a 4-foot tube with at the bottom, there's a little marble that allows water to come in. The water or the marble, basic plastic marble floats. And then when you pull up on the baler, which is, I got a string connected to it that I can lower it into the well. The marble sits on the bottom of the baler and traps the water, and I can bring the water up in the baler. And I basically remove 3 well volumes of water to make sure I have fresh water in my sample. The cooler on the bottom there, sitting on the ground, is what I get from the lab. The samples have to remain cold. And I fill up the appropriate bottles from the lab, fill out a chain of custody, and send it on to the lab. Next slide. And then at the lab, they do their work on analyzing. We have used at this site, we've used urethins in Sacramento, California. That's what we have done with our first few samples rounds. And then more recently, ALS in Holland, Michigan was able to do the analysis of PFAS at their lab. And so that is where we have been sending our samples more recently. And they use a test method called method 537 modified. And that is a method that is commonly used for what EGLE requires for PFAS sampling. Next slide. Sampling and reporting requirements. So the sampling requirements, we have to sample for what we consider the Michigan 28 PFAS analytes. So this EGLE came up with this list, and that is the list of analytes that we receive from the lab for results in each of our samples. We will have 9 sentinel wells that will be sampled quarterly, 8 compliance wells sampled quarterly. The sentinel wells, those are wells kind of outside of our plume. They are supposed to be clean, so we don't want to see any PFAS in them. The compliance wells are set inside the plume, so those we do expect to see PFAS in, and we use those so that we can watch for trends. Is it increasing or is it decreasing? So that is why we are sampling wells within the plume as well, so we can keep tabs on what's happening within the plume. So other sampling reporting requirements, be the lab results. We'll have a report that we put together each quarter with the analytical results. We also keep tabs on groundwater, where it's going, and produce groundwater contour maps. And we produce trend analyses of the PFAS results and put that together all in a report and send that to the state. Next slide. Here's a map showing locations where we have collected samples. It's not all the locations, but it's quite a few of them. So all the splotched wells that you see there, those are the ones that we've sampled. At least one of, if there's multiple wells in those locations, we sampled at least 1 or 2 in those locations. So we have collected 47 groundwater, or we've tested 47 wells around the site. Of those 47 wells, 21 were above criteria. And as I mentioned, we use the modified method 537, and we get a list of 28 PFAS compounds. Next slide. So a contingency if groundwater exceeds cleanup criteria, that's another component of the RAP. I mentioned the sentinel wells that we're going to be sampling. The sentinel wells are supposed to remain clean. What happens if they're not? So starting in the upper left box, we sample the sentinel well. If the results come back good, they're all below criteria or non-detect, then we continue on with our approved monitoring schedule. If we come back and see a result that has an exceedance, it's above the MCL criteria, then we're going to resample the well. If it's good, then we continue on with our approved schedule. If another exceedance is found, then we consider that a confirmed exceedance. Then we have to prepare an action plan to address the exceedance. In some of these cases, it might be as simple as installing another well further away and checking to see if it's there, if there's any PFAS there. If there's not, we'll use that as our next sentinel well. These are some, it's just probably the most common way of addressing these exceedances. As you saw, the PFAS it's not a huge extent across the site. So we have a lot of room on the site. The PFAS is on county property, and we want it to stay on county property. And that's the purpose of setting these sentinel wells where they are, to assure that they are on county property, that the plume stays on county property. Next slide. All right, besides monitoring, there's also going to be land use restrictions. And here is a map showing the wastewater storage lagoon along with the landfill in the lower right corner there. The red dash that surrounds the landfill and the lagoon is a restricted area. The restriction is placed to prevent drinking water wells from being placed in that area. So any place within the restriction, drinking water wells will not be allowed to be placed in that area. And that is because water being in contact with the water, drinking it, that's our basic exposure pathway that's at this site. And so in order to prevent any exposure, which you would have to prevent people from drinking the water, and so you have this land use restriction placed on the site to prevent anybody from installing a well on the site. Next slide. Next slide just shows the same feature. It's the red dash around the landfill. It's just showing a little bit more of a close-up of the area of the landfill and the expansion area. Next slide. So in summary, we're going to continue long-term groundwater monitoring and maintenance of the monitoring network. There's a financial assurance mechanism that has been established to cover monitoring costs as needed. In other words, if something happened to the county where they couldn't do taking care of the site anymore in the monitoring system, they provide a financial means to the state so that the state could take over the monitoring. There's a contingency plans if monitoring wells exceed groundwater protection standards. There's established on-site land use restrictions for areas within impacted groundwater. So those three items are the main components of our RAP. And that's the end of the presentation.
All right, thank you, Kurt. In a little bit, we'll have a second for some questions and answers. There's some questions that are already, people have already entered in there, and we'll get to those. Good questions. Thank you for that. And so, sorry. So I'm gonna, real quick, there's some online resources there. I'm going to try and grab control here for a little bit and basically just kind of show you how to get to the Impart site. There are, Christine Grossman put in the chat a direct link that you can use to go right to the Muskegon County Landfill Pfas site. And another, she had some contact information entered in there as well for Muskegon County Landfill, and a link to the remedial action plan. So I'm going to try to steal and share my screen here. So hopefully you're seeing my my screen with Google. I just go in here, I just type in Impart.
Hey, Fred, we're not
Yes.
seeing it yet. We're not
Oh,
seeing it
sorry.
yet. So you might need to reshare.
One more click. I needed one more click in there.
There you go. We can see your desktop Google search.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
So basically I just in Google, this is not an endorsement for Google, but in search engine, I just type in Impart, and it takes me to this. So I just do PFAS response. And at the top here, you see a bunch of different categories. You get information on fish and wildlife, foam, committees with Impart, stuff on health, drinking water. But I go to the, if you want information on this site, you go to the investigations. And then over here to PFAS sites and areas of interest. And then down here is a list of all of our sites. There's 199 of them, I think, right now. And you can either go down to the bottom or and go to the next page, or I think you can just type in Muskegon over here. And so that brings up all the sites that are in Muskegon. And I'm gonna scroll down, and then there's Muskegon County Landfill Type 2. And it takes me to the website. And I think on here, Kent will correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a link to the Muskegon County Landfill PFAS Remedial Action Plan. It's right here in the middle of the page. So you can click on that and see that. I think I'm going to stop sharing now. And Kent, you want to bring that up again? Thank you. All right. So again, there's links. The bit.ly link that's right here. Christine Grossman put that in the chat box. And here's contact information for Kent Walters and Greg Leverance. So if you have questions, you can ask them directly. Next screen, I think. So we're looking for formal comments, questions, or concerns on this proposed RAP for the Muskegon County Landfill are due by February 8th, 2022. And they can be sent to Kent Walters at the email address below. And it also has Kent's phone number in there. Hope you can't hear my dog howling in the background. He's apparently missing everybody. So I have questions, and I'm going to go to the Q&A. Just going to kind of take these in order. So a question is asked, how often are PFAS chemicals released in an old 55 years old landfill? I think I can, PFAS has been around for a long time. PFAS is used in a lot of different products that we use on a daily basis. Kurt mentioned some things earlier. It's in clothing, it's in cosmetics, it's in, it used to be used in food wrappers and pizza boxes, because it's used to repel grease and oil. So it's been around for a long time. It's had a lot of uses. And so if there's a landfill, then there is a chance that there's PFAS in the landfill. And I think there's a statistic, Kent, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think PFAS is found in about 70% of landfills. Is that true?
Yeah, so of the, I think there's like 45 or 46 high priority landfills that we've identified in the state of Michigan. Of those, about 70% of them have detected PFAS above drinking water criteria.
So if you have any follow-up question to that. The next question I see is, I live in Trenton, Michigan. A landfill in the city next to us, Riverview, Michigan. The landfill has had many complaints. I thought I would listen to you folks to pick up info on PFAS. It began in 1968. So not much of a more of a statement than a question. If you have anything else to add to that, go ahead and enter it below.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Fred, too. I mean, if that individual just wants to troubleshoot with me about questions about PFAS, I mean, I know it's not necessarily related to this landfill, But I'd be happy to talk to you about it or get you to, a person who may be able to help you more. So.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Kent. Next question is there a vertical groundwater gradient associated with the site? So either Kurt or Kent, I don't know who wants to answer that.
Kurt, I'll let you answer it. I can fill in if need be.
Yeah, let's see, I don't have a map right in front of me that has my groundwater elevations. I do believe in some location it's pretty much even, I think. But I do believe, I'm trying to think, I think it does go down, but as you get by the interceptor trenches, it tends to go up by the interceptor trenches.
Yeah, it's a little that the hydrology at the site is very complicated because of a lot of influencing factors like the Muskegon Nuevo drain to the south. You have these interceptor trenches that surround the landfill. You have a unlined 800-acre storage lagoon that sits, above the groundwater table right next to it. But we do see vertical gradients right next to the landfill. So these wells that are right next to the landfill, you can see a downward gradient. Some of the B wells here where my cursor is, you see a downward gradient. Like Kurt was saying, some of the wells sort of don't really have any gradient. So it's sort of a mixed bag. There's just a lot of hydrogeologic influencing factors at this site.
Okay, and Christine would like me to remind you once again that Kent's contact information, if you didn't write it down, his contact information is in the chat section. So please use Kent. He's an excellent resource. So this question is the water in the groundwater interceptor trenches sampled for PFAS concentrations? Are there known detectable concentrations or exceedances in the trench water that is exiting the site? Where is the discharge point of the water in the groundwater interceptor trenches? And does the RAP for the site have a contingency for this water? So I guess let's start with, do we have PFAS in the interceptor trenches and at what levels?
Yeah, and I might, hey Jim, I think Sydney Ruhala should be on, and maybe you could unmute her. I'll kind of tee it off for her. But the interceptor trenches are really part of the wastewater treatment system, which is part of a different site. And Sydney, are you there? Are you able to speak to sort of maybe talk a little bit in more detail about that?
Yeah, sure, I'm here. Yeah, so the interception trenches, those are part of the, as Kent was saying, part of the wastewater treatment plant design. It's there to essentially those two large lagoons that you had seen in the some of the earlier figures that were shown in tonight's presentation. Those interception trenches are to collect any seepage from the lagoons. That wastewater from those trenches is then collected and it's ultimately discharged to surface water feature nearby the wastewater treatment plant under a discharge permit through the Water Resources Division within EGLE.
Did that cover all the parts of the question, Fred?
Yeah, so where is the discharge point for the groundwater interceptor trenches? So it discharges to the lagoons, back to the lagoons, right?
So the interception trenches, that water is ultimately collected, and then it goes through, they discharge that through a series of, they're called rapid infiltration basins, kind of depending on the trenches, they have numerous trenches that kind of surround the property there, but it's filtered kind of through a rapid infiltration basins that are also under drained. And so the water that infiltrates through those basins is then recollected. That infiltration process aids in the further treatment of the wastewater. And then that is discharged. That water is ultimately discharged to a surface water feature. I know Mosquito Creek is up there. I'd have to confirm the exact surface water body that it's discharged to, but it is under a discharge permit of the Water Resources Division that they have to meet certain criteria for chemicals in the discharge there.
So they monitor so the contingency for this is that discharge is permitted and monitored so that they don't have exceedances.
That is correct. Yep. And we work with the county there at the wastewater treatment plant to assist with compliance of that discharge permit if exceedances were to happen. But that is routinely monitored and addressed as if and when exceedances occur.
Okay. Thank you, Sydney.
Yep.
I think there was one other thing. I can't remember if Sydney touched on it, but the Interceptor trench has been tested in select locations, and it does have PFAS in it. It has, I mean, it's not really groundwater. It's above the groundwater criteria. It's a wastewater technically, so there's not really a criteria for it. But to compare it to something, it does have values that are above groundwater criteria, but we don't compare it to that because it's technically called a waste. It's technically identified as a wastewater. But I think Christine, if you haven't already, she will post a link to the Muskegon County Wastewater Treatment Plant MPART website. It's actually its own MPART website. And if you want to learn more about that site, you can follow that link and you can find Sydney's contact information if you have further questions about the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay. Thank you, Sydney and Kent. So the next question is, have you installed any monitoring wells outside of the landfill area?
We can give that one to Kurt.
Yeah, all the monitoring wells have been on county property, but let's see, I'd say the ones that we have installed are basically related to the landfill. We have sampled some other wells that are related to the wastewater treatment system. So it's a very, very large area here that we're dealing with. But most of the wells that we have sampled are on the screen, what you see there.
So I'm going to expand that a little bit. I think what the person is asking for is I think they want to know, do we, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I mean, we have a definition for where the PFAS from the landfill exists, and we have a line that we know is clean.
Correct. Yeah. Sure. And so, yeah, if you go all the way there, this is the plume, pretty much is defined right there in the orange. And that's the extent of what we defined. It's to the south. Groundwater is flowing from the south to the north towards our landfill. So what we're concerned with is what is basically on the north side of Apple Ave, since we're not responsible for, the landfill is not responsible for what is south of Apple Ave. Anything that we would sample to the south of Apple Ave is just to give us an idea of what's coming at the landfill.
Okay. One of the blue iso concentration figures, it does not look like the plume has been fully defined to the south. Please discuss why that is.
As I just mentioned, the groundwater is flowing from the south to the north. And so as I just said, that anything south of Apple Ave is a different source. It's not the landfill itself. And we're concerned about the landfill itself.
And I'll add into that too. Because we have detections that aren't related to landfill doesn't mean that EGLE's ignoring it. EGLE is investigating, potential other sources, offsite sources that could be contributing to the PFAS plume that commingles with the landfill plume. But for, like Kurt was saying, for the landfill purposes, they are looking at potential releases from the landfill, but the overall scope of PFAS in the area is also being looked at.
Okay. So the shades of blue in there, the different contours that are the darker blue is where we have higher concentrations. Do you know, are those like in that center portion there? What are the concentrations like? Well, go to the right of that in that larger where it says Act 87 landfill, that, yes, that area. So do we know what the concentrations are in that area?
Oops. Showing the wrong screen. Yeah, we do know the concentrations in that area, and I was trying to pull up a chart to give you an idea. I think, Kurt, do you remember off the top of your head? Was it that area? Was it in like the 20 to 30 parts per trillion for PFOA? Or do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look at their tables with that. But that's based on some of the wells that we sampled south along the landfill.
The answer is yes, we do know the concentration. If you want to get those specific numbers, I can have those in a more easier shareable format for you if you want to learn more. So you can just get a hold of me and I can share that information with you.
I know we have know the concentrations. I know that's what they're getting at. So I was hoping, if we had it, tips. So that's okay. How many rounds of sampling have been completed at Sentinel wells, and can you discuss observed trends? Kurt, you want to answer that?
Where's Dean? If you're on there too. Let's see. We have seems like there were 3 rounds. And this is more of the investigative part. We haven't done long-term sampling at a lot of these wells yet. That's part of the what we'll be doing under the wrap to be able to see the long-term trends. But so far we have done at least 2 full rounds. 2 rounds of sampling at some of the wells. The Sentinel wells and so on were selected for the wrap, and they will start being sampled once the wrap's approved. And then we can start measuring our trends from then on.
What frequency are those sampled at, Sentinel wells?
The Sentinel wells will be on a quarterly basis, so 4 times a year.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, like Kurt was saying, this is completed the investigative part of the PFAS investigation. They've defined where PFAS is and where it isn't, and going forward, they're going to have repeated sampling to develop those trends. At this moment, there's only a few wells that have been sampled more than once, and those concentrations are pretty much similar concentrations, but that doesn't really tell us much at this point. So as time goes on, we'll get those trends and we'll be able to see what's going on in the plume, if it's going up, going down, staying the same, and that'll give a lot of information to the site about potentially if more action is needed, or if what their current plan is the current proposed plan is sufficient moving forward. So that'll come with time. The trend charts will come with time.
Okay. Yeah, because we haven't really been out there sampling for very long, so trends are very early in the. How has the recent drain work in the area affecting water flow direction by the plume? How's recent drain work in the area? How is it affecting groundwater flow or the direction of the plume? Maybe.
Kurt, you can kick that one off.
Well, as far as the recent drain work, the interceptor ditches have been cleaned out to improve the flow. And as part of the wrap, they do have to be maintained to continue the flow, so that our what you see as the flow pattern that you see here, we want to keep that pretty consistent with it flowing towards the interceptor trench. And so if you've noticed any drain work being done in the past year or so, that was the county cleaning out the interceptor trench to make sure that it flows efficiently and captures the groundwater, and keeps this pattern that I have here in our groundwater contour map that's shown right now. As far as any other drain work, with any other drain work.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, maybe I'm interpreting this question a little too much, but there's part of this figure that you can't see on the map. But the Newego Muskegon drain is sort of this dotted hashed line right here. And at this particular location, or at this part of the drain, it's actually what we call a losing stream, which means that groundwater doesn't feed this stream. Groundwater has the ability to flow under that stream. And what it's doing is it's flowing, the water in the groundwater is flowing through that stream, and it's flowing to those groundwater trenches that surround the landfill. So like I said earlier, it's a pretty complicated hydrology system out here, but they have a very good network in place to keep tabs on how the groundwater flows, how it may change seasonally, and that's also part of their plan, including with the PFAS sampling, is also to measure groundwater elevation so that they can determine which way the groundwater is flowing and continue to show which way that groundwater is flowing.
And this is Greg. I think that question might be related to some work the county drain commissioner's office has been doing. I don't know if we have any data on how that would impact the system here. I don't know that it would, but that might be the genesis of the question.
Gotcha. Maybe that person can connect with you to get more information on that then.
Okay, thanks, Greg. So this question, I think, is very similar to one we had before. Where does the groundwater interceptor trench discharge to, and it's a sample for PFAS? Yes, and sorry for that. And PFAS has been detected, and they do have to meet an NPDES discharge limit. So
Yeah, and Fred,
yeah, sorry.
this is Sydney again. I can just chime in there to confirm the location of that discharge. The wastewater from those interception ditches, as well as the treated wastewater from the Muskegon wastewater treatment plant, those are discharged ultimately to the Muskegon River.
Okay. All right, thank you. Are there protections in place to protect migrating birds and waterfowl from coming into contact with contaminated wastewater? Is there an oily film on the contaminated wastewater in the two wastewater storage areas? That's a question more for the wastewater treatment lagoons, not really pertinent. I mean, fine question, but not really germane to the landfill wrap. So I guess I would say maybe we can get you some contact information for Sydney Rahala, and she could maybe discuss that with you. Can we get Sydney's contact information put into the chat, Christine?
It's already in there, but I'll put it in again. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you. Will the public be notified if the plume starts to spread or crosses the county property line? Kurt?
I would, yeah, if that is the situation, yeah, we would have to notify the property owner.
Yeah, and I would also add that this, like Fred showed you earlier, this does have its own website. So any sampling that they do, any results that they find, anything new at the site will be updated on that website. So it would be a good resource that if you're curious about what's going on at the site, any new information, usually what happens is when the site gets information, they pass it on to EGLE. And then EGLE, we will put it on that latest round of information. We'll put it up on the website. So if they did find something unusual or out of the ordinary, that would be posted on the website and you'll be able to see it there.
How will PFAS be treated and handled in the groundwater? So Kurt, you want to discuss what happens there?
What was the question? How is it treated?
How will the PFAS be treated and handled in the groundwater?
You know, it's treated, well, it's basically, it runs through back into the groundwater treatment system of the wastewater. Is, you know, the groundwater is flowing towards that location. And we're basically, the wrap is, what's in place is just the monitoring to make sure it's not going off site. And so the treatment itself basically is dilution with encountering what's under the wastewater treatment lagoons and the water that's in the interceptor trenches.
Right. What was mentioned before is the contaminated groundwater at the site. It eventually gets captured by the wastewater treatment interceptor trench system, and then it makes its way out that discharge point that Sydney was talking about. That is tested for PFAS, and it is monitored for certain contaminants. So that's basically the path of the contaminant.
The lagoons are the wastewater treatment system, and so it goes
Correct.
there. Next question is, does the 70% apply to the groundwater around the water or the leachate from the landfill? So I think that's referring to where we have finding PFAS at 70% of our landfills. And Kent, you want to answer that?
Yeah, that 70% is in groundwater. So at the 40-some sites that we've tested so far, those are all groundwater samples, and 70% of the sites have PFAS above that groundwater standard. But there has been a leachate study across the state of Michigan too. That's also available. I believe it's available on the MPART website. You can download it. Where I don't know how many off the top of my head, but there had to have been 20 to 30 different landfills tested their landfill leachate. But I can tell you that all of them detected PFAS in their leachate, which isn't surprising because many products that we own and that we throw away contain PFAS in them, and they all end up at landfills, and then that all eventually breaks down and into their leachate. So the MPART website is a good source of information for a lot of PFAS questions.
Okay. What's being done regarding the two off-site sources of PFAS coming onto your property? Seems like you're monitoring a large portion of someone else's problem. Kurt, I guess that one's for you.
Well, or Kent, you have someone that wants to answer that one?
Well, part of, yes, you would be monitoring, potentially someone else's, plume that's coming on the site, but you would want to do that because you want to make sure with whatever is coming on the site, you want to know if it's increasing or if it's decreasing or staying the same so that you can keep better tabs on the plume that would be coming off of the landfill. So it's really not uncommon for sites to monitor groundwater upgradient of their site because they want to know what's the quality of groundwater coming onto the site so that we can sort of get in a baseline of, where we're starting at to move forward. So yeah, they would be potentially monitoring, the offsite source, but it's a good idea because you want to have some baseline to start at.
Yeah. So I guess they are monitoring someone else's problem, but trying to keep it in, keep a handle on it as far as it is impacting them. It appears that PFAS.
I'll just quick
sorry,
add too on that. Like I said earlier, the other potential source is being looked at by EGLE. So it's not just sitting there. It is being looked at. So
good point. Thank you, Ken. Right, I think this is the same question. It appears that PFAS is migrating onto the site. How are offsite sources being assessed? The wastewater treatment plant then appears to spray the wastewater offsite to the surrounding property. That is a question more for the wastewater treatment program rather than the wrap for this. Again, I guess I would direct you to Sydney Rahala for questions about that. But yeah. Next question is the wastewater treatment plant which handles the groundwater interceptor trench water in compliance with its permit? Does the wastewater treatment plant reduce Phos to below 12 parts per trillion? Cindy, do you want to, you're on, so do you want to answer that one real quick?
Or can you repeat that one more time? You cut out there for a second on me.
I'm sorry. Is the wastewater treatment plant, which handles the groundwater interceptor trench, in compliance with its permit? Does the wastewater treatment plant reduce PFAS to below the 12 parts per trillion?
Yeah, so the Muskegon County wastewater treatment plant there, they through a program, that the Water Resources Division runs, they conduct kind of routine monitoring for PFAS of their effluent. You can find on their MPART, webpage for this site is up in the chat, I believe, the link to it. They're monitoring on a quarterly basis under what we call, it's an industrial pretreatment program, PFAS initiative that requires them to do that monitoring. I believe in the past, they may have had water quality value exceedances, but they are working to reduce sources of PFAS to the wastewater treatment system under that industrial pretreatment program. And so that their, effluent values have come down over time, and we are continuing to work with them to ensure that they are able to meet that water quality value.
Okay, thank you, Sydney. How often is how often is wastewater from the Incept trenches sampled and analyzed for PFAS before it's discharged to the stream? So again, that's wastewater treatment question, and that goes into the lagoons, it is discharged, just like Sydney was saying. They're monitoring that on a quarterly basis, and they're within permit limits. Sydney, if you want to correct me, go ahead.
Yeah, just so what's getting monitored is what we call the effluent, or kind of the final treated wastewater. So it's at the outfall to the Muskegon River. So it's that outfall point of the final treated wastewater, that's what they're monitoring on a quarterly basis. As Kent had mentioned earlier, they have taken samples directly from the interception trenches, but they are not required to routinely monitor that, as that ultimately is not the final product that is discharged to the Muskegon River.
Okay, thank you again. What is the current fate of leachate within the landfill? Kent or Kurt?
Greg might be a good person too, since he's the landfill manager,
Greg, you want
Leachate
to
is,
field that?
yeah, the leachate's discharged to the wastewater treatment lagoons.
Okay. Kurt, when you were collecting groundwater samples, your boots and your gloves are water repellent, which would indicate cross-contamination of the collected samples.
The nitrile gloves are supposed to be PFAS free. They're not water repellent, other than the material is basically waterproof. Nothing was sprayed on it to make them repellent. They're disposable. The boots are also, I made sure I purchased the rubber boots. That rubber is waterproof, not sprayed to make it water repellent. So they are specifically purchased for PFAS sampling, and the nitrile gloves were specifically chosen for PFAS sampling as well, because they tend to be PFAS free in the manufacturing process.
Yeah, and I'll add too that on the MPART website, we have a list of approved sampling equipment, sampling devices, and nitrile gloves are the recommended gloves to be doing PFAS sampling. And I know Kurt, when he goes out and he does PFAS sampling, he basically prints out a PFAS checklist, which kind of runs you through, like, are you wearing any waterproof coats? Did you touch something? Are you doing this? And you kind of run through that checklist to make sure that you don't potentially have anything with PFAS on it. I know Kurt uses that. I've seen him use it before out in the field. So I would have confidence that in him that he didn't have something on him that had PFAS in it.
Okay, thank you. John mentioned that south of Apple Ave is not landfill property and therefore not being monitored. How can this be? The county also owns property south of Apple Ave. Seems like they should be monitoring both. And I think the answer is yes, they are monitoring both. But for purposes of this meeting, again, and for purposes of the remedial action plan, this focus is only on the potential groundwater contamination, or the groundwater contamination from the landfill that the landfill is putting out there. So they're monitoring the groundwater that flows into the landfill from the south, which you're correct is my understanding is county property. But that system, that's part of the wastewater treatment plant system that is under a separate evaluation. Is that close, Kent?
Yeah, I'd say like I said before, yeah, we're aware that there appears to be PFAS coming onto the site, but it's, like I said, it's being looked at within EGLE to determine what exactly that source is.
How long is the financial assurance for a landfill? Is it 30 years? If so, what happens after 30 years? Is there no more sampling or remediation taking place? You want to talk about that, Ken, or
Yeah, I can talk about it and maybe Tim can fill in if I missed
Tim?
anything. Well, I'll start. The monitoring will go on as long as there's groundwater contamination. And if the landfill closes, if it shuts down, it'll go into what's called a post-closure period. And during that, which is a 30-year post-closure period. But if there's still groundwater contamination after that 30 years, they still need to monitor it. So it basically, and Tim, you can jump in after I'm done. Basically, it's in place as long as there's groundwater contamination.
Yeah, I think that's correct, Kent. And the financial assurance that was mentioned for the RAP, as Kent said, stays in place as long as there's groundwater that exceeds criteria. So there's not a 30 years after the whole landfill has been closed, the entire unit. It goes on in perpetuity or until the groundwater is below criteria.
okay. Did the unlined portion of the landfill predate the wastewater system and infiltration trench?
I think that's a great question.
Yeah, Greg, you want to field that one?
I don't believe so. I think the wastewater system was in place prior to the start of the landfill as an open dump.
Okay. The remedial action plan is essentially to place deed restrictions to prevent drinking water wells and monitor the groundwater wells in perpetuity, correct? Kurt or Greg, that's.
Yes, if I understood the question correctly.
Yeah, the question again is the remedial action plan is essentially to place deed restrictions to prevent drinking water wells and monitor the groundwater wells in perpetuity.
Yes, yeah, as long as there's contamination there, the deed restriction has to stay in place.
Right.
Above criteria, yep.
Or is leachate equivalent to groundwater at this site? I don't know if that's part of previous question.
What was the question?
It's leading from another question. So it says, or is leachate equivalent to groundwater at this site? So I think they're yeah, I don't know. I mean,
It's a question, guys, it's the question that came in earlier about the fate of leachate within the landfill.
So from the unlined landfill, I mean, we're not, there's nothing there to capture the leachate from that portion of the landfill. So in that portion, then there is you know, the leachate is mixed with the groundwater. I mean,
But I see Tim's on. I think he can explain more about the vast majority of what the landfill looks like.
Yeah, I think I would just explain that the oldest part of the landfill, the unlined dump area, that any liquid that goes through the waste there would percolate into the groundwater because there's nothing to stop it. That area is capped. So that greatly reduces the amount of leachate. All the areas east of there have a combination of liners. The immediate east is a clay liner. Then there's a clay double liner farther in cell 1 and 2. And then as we go farther to the east, the modern part of the landfill, that area has what's called a double composite liner. And So any leachate is collected, and then there's also a leak detection system that's monitored to prevent issues like this coming up in the future.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Okay, so this is follow-up question to Sydney's response on where the water is discharged from the Interceptor trench. How is it discharged to the Muskegon River? Everything that goes into the lagoons is discharged by pivot arm irrigation into the fields on the property. This isn't really, but if Sydney wants to address that.
Sure, I can try to touch on that. And like Fred and Kent said, this is we have kind of a separate investigation going on for PFAS at the wastewater treatment plant. So feel free to reach out to me by, phone or email if you have other questions. But the treatment system design at the wastewater treatment plant there is a little different than some other types of facilities where the wastewater in the lagoons is discharged to those spray irrigation fields that are both kind of northeast and south of the lagoons. Those spray irrigation fields are under drained. So essentially, what it's designed to do is to try to collect most of the water that infiltrates into the ground around those spray irrigation fields, and that collected water is routed back through the interception trenches, and that collected water is then ultimately discharged to the Muskegon River. They acknowledge that some of that water on the spray irrigation fields does ultimately enter groundwater and it is not recollected, but the ultimate design of the treatment system is to be recollecting that infiltrated water on the spray irrigation fields and discharging it to the Muskegon River.
Okay, thank you. So if there's follow-up questions to that, I'd urge you to please contact Sydney. I think it's fair to mention that the impacted groundwater is not treated, that there is no treatment for PFOS in this plan. And I think that's true. It's treated through the lagoon system.
Right, I don't think there's any direct treatment of PFAS, but technologies for PFAS are rapidly changing. There's a lot of new up and coming treatment possibilities that may get cheaper in the future that actually destroy PFAS. Currently, treatment of PFAS is done by absorption, which doesn't get rid of PFAS. It just kind of sticks it on something else, and a lot of times that stuff ends up back in landfills. But as time progresses and PFAS technologies advance, there may be a technology that could be implemented at the site so that it would be collected and then eventually destroyed.
Right. Yeah, it was an interesting program the other day on the treatment. Won't go into it, but using some bacteria basically to break it down. So the next question is, thanks. It appears as if the PFAS from the landfill is sent to the wastewater treatment plant, which then sends it to the irrigation areas, which then migrates back on site to the interceptor trenches. Greg or Kurt?
Yeah, there is, I'm sure, some cycling there. I would say majority of what comes from off the site it's going into the ditches, and however that water is handled, that's at the treatment plant. That's what happens to it. That's how it gets treated.
So the last question I have right here is, so if leachate with PFAS is discharged to the wastewater treatment lagoons and commingled there with intercepted groundwater bearing PFAS, all PFAS now ends up at the county's wastewater treatment plant. Am I understanding this correctly? I think that's
I would,
done
yeah,
correctly.
I would say that's correct. And to be fair, that's pretty much where all landfill leachate from landfills across the state of Michigan end up. Landfill leachate historically is, along with, most every other industrial, wastewater, a lot of times that would end up at wastewater treatment plants. But yeah, what that person stated, what, ultimately is correct, is it ends up at the wastewater treatment plant.
So, yeah, and so the ultimate check on that is, are they meeting their NPDES permit?
Right. Yep. And that's where Cindy can be a useful tool to learn more information about that program and specifically Muskegon and what they're doing. She would be a valuable resource. And like was in the chat, what was dropped in the chat box, that it has its own MPART webpage, so you can go onto that webpage and check out any activities that are going on with that site.
Okay, so that's the last question that I have in here. I guess I would throw it out there. Has anyone raised a hand or anything, Jim?
Yeah, Fred, we actually got a hand up from Connie, and she's had it up for a while, so I don't know if she still got a question or not, because I know she had some questions in the chat already. So, oops. Got the wrong one. Hold on a second. I guess she took her hand down, so I guess maybe she got her questions answered there.
All right. Well, if you don't have a question, Connie, or if you do have a question, want to shoot it in there, or maybe it was answered already.
Or you can always email me. My contact information is on the screen. You can always email myself or Greg, or call us.
Okay. Again, formal comments on the remedial action plan are due February 8th of this year. And those can be sent to Kent Walter's attention, and the email that's in the chat session. I don't have anything else. Is there anything that I'm forgetting, Jim or Kent or Christine?
Nope, just want to make sure people know in the chat, Christine did put a bunch of good links in there that you might want to check out. Yeah, so I guess, Fred, if you're ready, we can wrap this up.
Okay, yeah, with that, I guess I'll bring it to a close. I thank you all for your participation tonight. It's some excellent questions. It's a difficult topic, and I guess just thank you for your time and appreciate it.